Good evening, everybody. I'm Janet Fletcher, and welcome to Cheese O'Clock, the final in our four-part winter series, but there'll be more to come. You are in for an hour of great cheese and fine wine and conversation about the two. We have two guests tonight. We have our winemaker guest, Jonna Kelly from Galerie Wines, and our cheesemaker guest, Alan Glustoff from Five Spoke Creamery in New York. And I have a co-host, Laura Werlin, and we just hope you'll engage in the chat. We want this to be very interactive, so we really welcome your questions. We want you to chat with each other. We'd love for you to let us know where you're here from. Please get in on that chat and let us know where you're signing in from. Tonight's theme is Aged to Perfection, which means tonight we're tasting four cheeses that all have been aged in a way to improve them. You know, you can make a fresh cheese and put it out there, or let it ripen in your ripening room for a week or two. But these are all cheeses that have been improved by the aging process in four very different ways. So that's what we hope to convey tonight, is what aging brings to cheese. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, Laura Werlin.
Thank you, Janet. Hi, yes, I'm Laura Werlin, and I am the author of several books on cheese and speaker, and do a lot of virtual tastings these days, but maybe we'll all be out in the real world and having real tastings soon enough in person. Just a couple of things. First of all, I just want to give a shout out to my teammate here, Janet. This has been another 4-week whiz-bang series. It goes by so quickly, and it's always so much fun to collaborate with you. And so I'm sorry this is coming to an end, but we have another one in store, which we'll tell you about later. But in the meantime, I want to encourage everybody to post this on social. So you can do it many ways. You use this little device here, take a picture of your cheese board, take a selfie with you, the screen and your cheese board all together, and post it. We put our social handles up at the beginning there, and otherwise you can find them on our websites too. But really, it's all about being social, even in this virtual space. And so I encourage you to do so. And as Janet said, please engage in the chat. Do let us know where you're from, and let us know anything else that you'd like us to know about you in terms of cheese. We don't need to know how many children you have and things like that, although that would be interesting too, I'm sure. But do let us know how you're enjoying the cheeses and what you're liking about them and all of that. Okay, with that, I'm going to toss it back to Janet.
Okie doke. We have, as I said, a distinguished winemaker guest, Jonna Kelly with Galerie Wines. Jonna I was fascinated to hear, has a long family history in the restaurant business here in Sonoma County. Her family, a lot of you probably, I have a lot of Bay Area people on the call, I think, so a lot of you probably know the Depot restaurant on the square in Sonoma. Well, that's Jonna's family. She grew up in the restaurant business and couldn't wait to get out of it. So she studied chemistry in college, and that proved to be a very good background for what became her winemaking career. She's been at Galerie for a couple of years, and I think she's going to now introduce us to the two wines that we'll be tasting with our cheeses tonight.
Yeah, thanks, Janet and Laura. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to try all this, and I really would just encourage everybody to experiment. You know, lots of times we think, oh, we have to have the white wine before we have the red wine, but maybe look at this as kind of a tasting adventure, and we'll go back and forth and taste the different wines and the cheeses together and see how that works or doesn't work. And all of that is, part of the experience. So yes, as Janet said, I grew up literally in the restaurant business. My family lived above the restaurant and the restaurant was below. So I learned a lot about food and wine, was kind of steeped in it from an early age. And after getting a background in chemistry, although not originally intending to go into winemaking, I found it a really fun way to apply both my love of science and then also food, wine, and hospitality and all that good stuff that we enjoy. So tonight we have two Galerie wines for you. The Sauvignon Blanc, this is the 2019 from Napa Valley. And just to tell you a little bit about this, one of the things that makes this wine unique is it's fermented in 3 different kinds of vessels. So we use the traditional stainless steel, which of course is commonly used in Sauvignon Blanc all over the world. We also use a selection of neutral French barrels. So these actually are barrels that had previously had Chardonnay fermented in them for one of our other wines. And after several years of that, when they're like 5, 6 years old and not any of those caramely vanilla oak characters are left anymore, we just get the influence of the wood and the oxygen, then I take them into my Sauvignon Blanc program. And then the other thing that we use are the concrete eggs. You may have heard of these or seen these pictures of these before, but they're ones we have are about 500 gallons. They're probably, I would say, about 8 feet tall and 6 feet around, something like that. And the thing I love about those is they give us wonderful texture in the wine while still preserving all that great fresh fruit and crispness that a lot of us really enjoy in Sauvignon Blanc. So the combination of blending those 3 together, I think, gives the wine a lot of complexity and fruit and texture and layers and different things going on. And it's just a wine that I really enjoy, and I hope you guys like it too. But I always love to hear what other people taste in it. You know, sometimes different aromas or characters come out. So please feel free to chime in with your thoughts on that one. A little bit about the vineyards. If Sergio wants to put a map up for us, my handy helper in the background here, we'll let you guys see a map of Napa Valley and where these come from. So if you look on the map, the vineyard that's way at the bottom, Longwood Ranch, that makes up at least 50% of this wine. And we have 2 clones from the Loire Valley out of that vineyard. And it has just an awesome character. It's a cooler part of Napa Valley where that's growing. And then the other vineyard is kind of smack dab in the middle. It's Wilson Ranch. So that's up in a warmer area. So here again, we have 2 very different vineyards, just like very different vessels that we're using. And then blending those together is what makes this wine what it is. So I think, should we switch over to the cab, or do we want to taste through? Yeah, go right to the cab. Okay, cool. So Cabernet is 2016, Napa Valley. And I just wanted to say one thing about aging, since that is the theme of our evening tonight. And that is that I think this is the perfect time to start drinking this wine. I've noticed for Galerie cabs, and actually for a lot of Cabernets, right around 5 years, they really start hitting a sweet spot. And you can certainly enjoy them before that, but I think you get this really great balance of where the wine has had time in bottle, the tannins have integrated, and you get new aromas coming out. And it's just a great window that's opening up after 5 years. So I love it that we're having this wine tonight. This wine, Sergio, can we see that map one more time? We'll check out the Cabernet vineyards. So similar to the Sauvignon Blanc, this wine comes from a selection of vineyards throughout Napa. So I kind of think of Napa as like a patchwork quilt, and you have these different vineyard sites and so many different soil types and microclimates. So that all comes together and we get the finished wine that's in the bottle here. And these vineyards will range from a couple of sites that are at elevation, like our Stagecoach vineyard. And that gives us more structure in the wine. And then some of our valley floor vineyards, like you can see there in the middle, close to Wilson Ranch, is Van Zee. That's one of my favorite valley floor vineyards. It's these beautiful old vines in St. Helena. It's all dry farmed, and it's just really like quintessential cab. It has a nice fresh fruit, and it also has a nice plushness. And that's how I like to style this wine. So it's there's a lot of substance there, but it's very pleasurable to drink. So it's very smooth. There's a lot of body, but it's like a soft, round body instead of maybe more of those challenging tannins that you can get sometimes in Cabernet. So that's a little bit about the Cabernet. The way we make it is very artisanal. kind of rustic and straightforward. We do some sorting when the fruit comes in. It goes into the tanks. We have all open top tanks, so the wine's getting oxygen as it's fermenting. We do several pump overs a day. It's all native yeast, so whatever comes in on the grapes from the vineyard is conducting the fermentation. And, you know, I'm tasting every day during fermentation and making a decision about when do I want to press that wine and remove it from the skins. And from there, it's to barrel, and then almost 2 years aging in barrel. This wine's about 60% new French oak, maybe 65%, and then the balance of neutral French oak. So it's really kind of traditional winemaking. And that's because we really want to let the fruit express itself. And, you know, there's a saying you've probably heard over and over again, if you talk to winemakers, that everyone says the wine starts in the vineyard, and you can't make a great wine without great grapes. And so a lot of our job when it comes into the winery is to not mess that up and to just make the best that those grapes can possibly give us. So that's a little bit about the Cabernet.
You've done a great job of not messing it up, I have to say.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'll just take it from here. So first of all, for anybody who joined late, I would like to invite you to join in the chat and tell us where you're from. And then if you have any questions, also there's a lot of information that goes through the chat, because we have cheesemakers, or people, not cheesemakers necessarily, but people from the cheese operation. Some of them are on the call, so they are on the presentation, I guess, so they can answer questions that maybe Janet and I cannot. So please feel free to do that. Also, I want you to know that all four Cheese O'Clock collections are still available on iGourmet, as are all four wine sets from each of the four wineries that we've been lucky enough to partner with for this series. And so, and the Zoom recordings are available from each of the sessions too, which means that you can have this experience all over again, or maybe your friends who missed them can, and you can get the Zoom recording links on Janet's and my websites. And as I said, all the cheeses from iGourmet and the wines from each of the individual wineries that we featured. So feel free to have a repeat performance as early and as often as you would like. Okay, I think it's time to taste cheese. What do you think, Janet?
I think, yeah, I'm hungry. This is torture, having these four cheeses in front of me for the last few minutes. They smell like, my kitchen smells great. And I have the honor of presenting our first cheese, which is a Spanish cheese called Montenegro. And it is this absolutely gorgeous chunk that you have, or some of you have. Look at this rind. This is a really unusual cheese. It's 100% goat cheese. It is made by one person. It was created by a man named Rafael Baez, and his farm, or his creamery, is near Madrid, about an hour west of Madrid, in Avila. And he created this, and now his daughter makes it. He's created it about maybe 35 years ago, and it's quite distinct. And this rind, to me, it looks like the bark of a birch tree with this black and white modeling. And for the longest time, I thought this was ash on the outside, but it's not. It's actually Penicillium roqueforti. This is a blue cheese on the outside, not on the inside. So that is quite unusual. And it's a shape that's also unusual. The Spanish make a handful of cheeses in this shape using these molds, and then they call them all pata de mulo, which means the mule's foot. I don't see it, but they just say it resembles the foot of a mule. And of course, when you slice it, you get a piece like this. It's just such a beauty on a cheese tray. It is by far our youngest cheese today, by far. It's released from the creamery when it's just maybe 3 or 4 weeks old. This I could tell when I feel it. I could tell when I cut it that is quite a bit more than 4 weeks old. I would say this might be a couple of months old, maybe more. Mine is firm, but it's going to start out more creamy, and this cheese has gotten more dry as it ages. Let's cut into it and taste it. I will say, and we're going to try it with the wines and see what we think. I would try it with both wines. Because this is blue and not ash, it's going to really affect the wine. So what I would do is I would cut away this rind because it's going to really compromise these beautiful wines. If I were just tasting it by itself, I would eat the rind. But because we have wine here that we want to respect, I would cut away that rind and then try it with the wine. So Laura, have you tried it?
Yeah. And I was going to say a couple of things. First of all, I don't know if we said that this was a goat cheese, but I don't know. Maybe
goat.
Okay.
Yeah.
So first of all, and goat cheese and Sauvignon Blanc are a classic pair, which we'll talk about in a second. But what I was going to say is I would encourage people to try it without the rind, just as you said, but also with it, with the wines, because some people I have found over time prefer the kind of the strength that you get of the pairing, even though I've often thought the winemaker, if they were there tasting that together, the rind and the wine, they might not like what happens to their wine. But I know a lot of people like that. So who are we to say what's right or wrong as far as that's concerned? The other thing is the rind, just independent of the wine, I find on my particular piece, it's a little bit stronger than sometimes I get with this cheese. Maybe do want to go as far as to say it's a little bit ammoniated, which means it kind of has a little bit of a burning sensation in the mouth, it's not harmful, don't get me wrong, and on the nose, but just a little. And then you get the blue flavor, as it were. Okay, so let's try it first without the rind. That's what I would do with the wine, with the Sauvignon Blanc.
Oh, dense and creamy and lemony. I got a really strong lemony flavor that I love, that bright acidity. This cheese, by the way, I said it was made, I think he created it in about early to mid 80s.
Yeah.
This is part of the renaissance of Spanish cheese making that got started then, because and I've told this story before, excuse me if you've heard it before, but Franco, the dictator who died in the mid 70s, was horrible for Spanish cheesemaking because he really clamped down on small cheesemakers. He insisted that in the interest of efficiency, Spanish cheesemakers needed, if they wanted to make cheese, they needed to make a lot of it. They needed to process like 10,000 liters a day, which is a lot. So it really drove all these small cheesemakers underground or just out of business. And it really threatened the heritage of Spanish cheesemaking. And, at that time, there was Manchego and there was Manchego. There was not a whole lot else. After Franco died, it was like, rain on, it was sprinkling over the fields and flowers popped up. I mean, cheesemakers started creating wonderful new things. And there was this revolution in Spanish cheesemaking. And this is an example of what we are now getting out of Spain. Totally original cheeses. There's nothing else like this. I can't think of another cheese that's totally like it.
We have one in the U.S. that's not unlike it, called Classic Log, made by Westfield Farms in Massachusetts. But it is unlike it, but it's similar. It's a goat cheese that's a log shape. The blue is only on the outside, and it's a beautiful cheese too. I was just going to say one thing about the Franco era. What it gave birth to is there were a whole lot of people that lived in the cities who wanted to move. These were university educated people. They wanted to move to the country and make livings and make lifestyles for themselves. And that was part of this whole renaissance of cheese making that occurred, particularly goat cheeses, particularly this cheese. And then there's another Spanish goat cheese called Gorosta that was born of that, essentially of that movement too. Okay, now, Janet,
Yeah.
what do you think?
Well, I tell you, I love the middle with the Sauvignon Blanc. I think it's awesome. And I like it, a lot of times you have a really fresh goat cheese with Sauvignon Blanc. And I love that middle that's a little bit aged with it. And then I like it with the rind with the cab. It's not bad with the rind with the Sauvignon Blanc, but it a little bit overpowers some of the flavors in the Sauvignon Blanc, I think, when you have the rind on there. It certainly isn't like, oh, this is a terrible combination or anything. It just is a little robust for the Sauvignon Blanc.
Does you find it?
One thing I wanted to say, when I was opening these cheeses earlier, and I had a little taste of each, and the thing that really struck me about them was the textures. There's the obvious, different flavors and aromas, but on your palate, each one has a really different texture, which I think is so cool, because in winemaking, we talk about texture all the time. Even in white wines, you hear it a lot with reds, but with white wines too, and just how that feels on your palate. And I just thought it was this really cool thing where I was like, oh yeah, it's just like winemaking, where the texture is so much a part of the experience. So I would just encourage people to, take note of that, as well as obviously all these great flavors that we have going on.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I just want to add to that I think sometimes people, they, just as they do with wine, they kind of gulp it. Cheese, you have to, if you really want to appreciate it, you have to leave it on your palate for a little bit and let your palate warm it up, and think about how it's melting on your palate or not. And, kind of try to come up with some of those texture words. There are so many ways to describe texture, but you won't really appreciate it unless you let it sit there for a little bit. So don't just, chew and swallow.
I find the density of this cheese just really kind of mind-blowing. And I'm curious, I'm going to go a little bit off script, because Alan, you are a cheesemaker, and this is not the kind of cheese you make, but I'm wondering what you think of it in terms of just from the standpoint of a cheesemaker. What do you think?
Well, I love goat cheese to begin with, even though we don't make any goat cheese, always have. And I was actually in Spain when Franco was still alive, believe it or not. But I love it. It's really a great cheese, and for me, it's a toss-up as to which wine I prefer. I started with the Sauvignon Blanc and loved it, and that it's a natural mix, but I like the cab with it as well. And I agree with you in terms of the density. It is different from a lot of the American goat cheeses in that regard. It's fuller, and I do like the rind, but I agree with you. I really don't. I prefer it if I wasn't drinking wine. So
yeah, no, that's yeah. This is, that's one of the things I love about this cheese, is the fact that it does represent history. It also represents a very, very highly regarded cheese expert, a guy named Enrique Canut, who, with Rafael Baez, who made this, who invented this cheese, they kind of created it together. And I just love the cheese history that it represents too. Okay, so Alan, now that I've introduced you, I'm going to introduce you. So everybody meet Alan Glestoff, the owner, founder of Five Spoke Creamery. And I just sort of love your background, Alan. So I guess you were drawn to dairy science early on, because in college you went to Unilever in Holland and worked, and I guess fell in love with European cheeses, as one would in Europe, I would think. And then you came back and worked for General Foods and helped them develop frozen yogurt and what was the other thing? Oh, pudding pops. I would just like to say
that. Does anybody remember it?
I think you kind of changed course along the way, I have to say.
Right.
And then 30 years later, I guess you purchased your farm.
Right.
In the Black Dirt region. I'm not sure what that means, but you can explain that, of Goshen, New York, in the Hudson Valley. Interestingly, I guess every building that you purchased, which was probably each one of which was dilapidated, has been restored, and we'll talk about sustainability too. But I love the fact that the last one, which was a former dance hall, is going to be turned into a cafe. I can imagine what just sort of, I can already hear the footsteps of days of yore. Anyway, so, and you founded Five Spoke, which of course I love the name, which I'd love for you to talk about too. And today's cheese is tumbleweed. So actually, I'm not going to let you talk because I want to set the stage with the video first. So Sergio, let's roll the video and then we'll talk.
We're a grass-fed raw milk farm where we produce our own artisanal cheeses, about 8 different varieties, and everything is made by hand. All the electricity is paid for by the solar panels that capture the energy. We've made a commitment not only to hopefully save on our electric bills, but we view it as the same way that you might plant a tree in the hopes that in the future you'll have something beautiful that remains for other generations. By making the investment 5 years ago, we were setting up this site for the long term. New York is really a wonderful place to have a cheese-making operation. They offer a number of incentives. The governor and NYSERDA help make this possible. It is important to make a commitment to sustainability.
Well, let's just start with that. So, why sustainable? And I think it kind of connects with how Five Spoke came about, and also tumbleweed. I mean, the whole Five Spoke, the name and everything. So, what's the ethos there?
Okay, I'll try and wrap it up. First of all, that was a bit of a surprise. I wasn't sure which video was going to be shown, but that's a good one. So, you know, the name, of course, Five Spoke Creamery we're all about the bike. I've always, every major point in life, something happened. I was on a bicycle, you know, I was going somewhere. So that's really how the name came about. But to your point, you know, it's also a subtle way of saying you could have great wines, you could have great cheeses, and as long as there's some balance, perhaps bicycle riding, some exercise, you know, it should work out. And in terms of reviving the farm, and all the buildings, you know, we're really trying to bring back what was. And some of this, of course, is how I picture things that may have been 100 years ago. And of course, I have no idea really how they were. But in my mind, you know, the farm and the cheese and how we make it is almost a role, if you will, if somehow you were to visit the farm 100 or 120 years ago. So, and of course, a lot of this is based, as you mentioned, on the cheeses I saw in Europe, going way back to college, when there definitely wasn't an American artisanal movement here. It was very difficult, even in Manhattan, to get great cheeses. So when I was in Europe and France and Holland and Germany, I was just awestruck by how great the cheeses were. As you mentioned, you know, I did work for a while in Holland. So I was always buying cheese from the market. You know, today we have these farmers markets. And of course, I have to laugh because traditionally, that's how people have bought cheese and other goods throughout the world. You know, once or twice a week, there'd be this market set up. You'd go there, you'd buy fresh bread, fresh cheese, you'd put it on your counter, no refrigerator, and enjoy it. And of course, enjoy it with, you know, some great wine or beer. So I hope that kind of touches on what you were asking.
Yeah. Well, and so, well, I guess we should probably talk about tumbleweed.
Mhm.
Again, I think you said that the name the name of tumbleweed came about because this cheese takes a little while it kind of, you saw, well, actually, I guess you saw an old Schwinn bike. And for
Right.
those of you out there who don't know what Schwinn bikes are, Google it.
Right. Right.
Um, or you saw, I guess it was a photo of it or something. And then, and it just kind of reminded you of that things take time to really develop in terms of food. Really, it should take time. And
Mhm.
tumbleweed is one of those, is an example of that.
Right. So yes, it is a cave-aged cheese with penicillin candida, sprayed on the outside. And of course, it looks a little different. These were, I guess, sort of wrapped for you. Sometimes we send them to restaurants in paper, and so of course it looks a little different, but this is a good representation. I think this particular batch was about 16 months, 17 months old. We never sell this cheese much before like 14, 15 months. And
And you said it's kind of an English farmhouse cheese crossed with the Cantal. I don't know if a lot of people would know what Cantal is.
mhm.
But what informed that decision to make a cheese like that?
Well, I don't know. It's like a math equation, which side came first. But I was working on a cheese. I knew what I wanted to try and achieve, um, and this is I guess, a good way of describing what we ended up with. So, I mean, Cantal is sort of a French version of a cheddar, right, Janet? How would you describe it?
I would say that's a fair description.
Yeah. So so this, each cheese is always going to be different, even if I took the same formula that you developed and made it in New York, it would taste different than, let's say, in California. Um,
Well, and you also made it in a particular shape, in a
right,
square.
right. So it is about a 10-pound square, which is unusual. And we did
Describe
experiment.
it more as a cube. I mean, to me, that's what's unusual about it. It's tall.
Yeah.
Well,
It's
it's not that tall, but okay. I mean, some of the cloth-bound cheeses are even taller. So,
So why the square?
well, it's first of all, it did work. We did try different molds, and that's another thing, as you know, that you could take the same formula, and if you put it in different molds and different times, it may be slightly different. So this seemed to just, in terms of the texture, the dryness, it seemed to work best. And a lot of feedback from the restaurants. They like this because they could use this size. It's a lot easier than like a 20 pounds or even larger. So a lot of that plays into it.
It's very nutty, and I find it very mellow. And we haven't said this yet, but this is raw milk, right, Alan? This is raw milk cheese.
These are all, we make about 6 different cheeses. They're all raw milk. Yeah, I hope everybody's smelling the cheeses before they taste it and tell me what you pick up.
And are you farmstead? Are you?
No, we were. That's a long story.
Okay.
Tending a herd is always a challenge, but we could talk about that if you want.
Beautiful raw milk cheese. I don't know if people noticed in the video, there was a quick shot of the vat with big slabs of curd that looked kind of like slabs of tofu, and they were cutting them and stacking them, and that's a process that's really only done with cheddar and cheddar type cheeses like this one. So I'm correct me
Right,
if I'm
that
wrong, Alan, it's
particular
kind of a way of
day-
controlling the moisture loss and the acid
Mhm.
development to do this cutting into slabs and stacking and turning and restacking. It's backbreaking.
It is. It is. But right. So yeah, that particular day we were making a younger cheddar, which is a little different than this one, but yeah, that's exactly right. So
Yeah. Well, because cheddar is a verb and it's a noun, right? It's a process. That's how I look at it. It's a process. You are cheddaring, and you're making a cheddar. So
I want to point out one other thing about your tools, your cheese tools. This is not a cheese. This is a cheese that I would use my parm knife with to make chunks because it's pretty firm and it just wants to chunk. But when I got this cheese out of its wrap today, the first thing I did was I took my plane and I just scraped it. I scraped a little bit away on all the sides, not a lot, just a little bit to release a fresh surface and get rid of any oxidation. So anytime you get a cheese, it's like you think it might have been in plastic for a while or in a vacuum pack, just give it a little scrape and you will release that. You'll get rid of any kind of plasticky taste. It's like having a fresh pour of wine in your glass. You know how you get that burst of aroma that way. So that's what I did.
yeah, and if
that's
all
a good
else fails, if you don't have a cheese plane, you can use like the back of a knife and just scrape like that as well. So Alan, somebody wants to know what the crystals are, and in a cheddar, often it's calcium lactate, but sometimes it's tyrosine. So I don't know what are the little crystals that people are getting.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. I kind of like them in this cheese. I like them in some Goudas. We really haven't done a full analysis. They do occur probably after about 15 months. And before I forget, I do want to encourage anybody that has a question like that to put it in the chat box, and my wife Barbara will answer you. Yeah, the crystals, when they occur, you get some nice flavor notes as well. So it's a combination.
Well, and just for people, you're only going to get it in an aged cheese
Right.
because of the process. So, Jana, what do you think? Which wine?
I love this cheese. I tell you, I wish I had a little griddle and like some butter and whole grain bread because I really want to make a grilled cheese right now and eat it with this Cabernet.
Yeah.
I think it's great with the Cabernet. There's something about that combination where it really brings out the fruitiness in the Cabernet, and then the Cabernet brings out this earthy nuttiness in the cheese. And I really like that. So I think it's fabulous.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think, when you get to a cheese with this level of maturity and concentration, my palate wants something with a little tannin in it. I want a nice.
Yeah, I agree. It definitely makes it happy. I mean, that's not me. That's the cheese talking to me, the cheese and wine combination. But I agree. The cab is a nice compliment.
We should move on to our next cheese in the interest of time and not giving these last two cheeses short shrift. We have a fabulous, gorgeous piece of Roth's Private Reserve from Wisconsin. And before I say any more, we're going to show you we're going to take you to Wisconsin. So fasten your seatbelts. Wow, that's a lot of inventory in that building. I want to point out four things quickly that I hope you noticed in that video that were important to notice. One was the copper kettle. This is, rare American cheese that's made in a copper kettle, which is very important for a lot of the Swiss type cheeses, some of the French mountain cheeses. And this Roth Käse that makes Roth Private Reserve is a Swiss-owned company. They have, their Swiss parentage. The parent company is MEEMMI, which is a large Swiss company. And so they have Swiss know-how here making this cheese, and they just believe in those copper kettles, and nobody quite knows what's happening with the copper, but there's some kind of enzymatic reaction between the copper and the milk. And there are a number of European cheeses that have to be made in a copper kettle by regulation. We don't have those laws here, but Roth Private Reserve is always made in the copper kettle from raw milk. And I hope you noticed the spruce planks that they age the wheels on. That's another secret, not so secret, but they believe in the planks. Instead of stainless steel shelving, which you might see in some more modern creameries, the planks, they kind of wick some of the moisture from the cheese and some of the humidity from the room. They have microbial life, and so they help mature and flavor the cheese. And it just wouldn't be the same cheese without the spruce planks. I hope you noticed that he was painting those wheels with something, and it was actually a brine that has bacteria added to the brine, good bacteria. And so that brine produces what we call a washed rind cheese that's damp on the outside, and it encourages certain bacteria to proliferate on the outside and contribute to the flavor of the cheese. So that's a very important step. And the fourth thing is watching that. You watch the gentleman take that implement. It's kind of like an apple core, and he stuck it in the side of the cheese, and that's called a trier for kind of obvious reasons. And it's how they test whether the cheese is ready. He doesn't even have to taste the cheese. He can tell from looking and smelling whether that cheese is ready for sale. We have this Roth's Private Reserve is released at a minimum of 9 months, but we have the incredible good fortune of having a piece that's much older. This is a 17-month-old wheel that you got. All of us are tasting off the same lot, I believe. It's in the 17 months. So here too, you'll see the crystals. I see the crystals in my piece. And that's, as Laura said, a sign of maturity. It's a good thing. I haven't even tasted it yet, but you're probably going to get a little bit of crunch. And I hope you will take a moment to smell this cheese, because it's going to smell like roasted onion and brown butter. And it just always reminds me of French onion soup. I make that association with caramelized onions and like a dry aged steak. To me, this is the dry aged steak of cheese. It is so intense and high in umami and savory. Laura, what's your impression?
Well, you took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, onion. It's just sings onion. But the other thing I was going to say, not about the flavors or the aroma of the cheese, but Roth cheese actually paved the way in America for the use of copper kettles and for the use of those wood planks, because there was a lot of resistance, at least in Wisconsin, to both of those, because copper is considered a corrosive metal. Don't worry, folks, if you get a little copper in you, it's good for you. And the wood is I mean, it's historic. It's gone back since the beginning of time, and it has all the properties that Janet enumerated. So, but Roth really fought for that and got it. And I think we all have them to thank for allowing that to be elsewhere as well, because of their fierce fight. Anyway, and this cheese, we are really lucky. First of all, Roth's Private Reserve you can find it, but not as readily as some other Roth cheeses. And a 17-month version of it, I don't think I've ever had, and I've had this cheese quite a bit. And what I love about it is that, you think, gosh, this is almost a year and a half. Why is it not dry and crumbly like a Parmigiano Reggiano or something like that? but it's not. It's super, it's creamy, it's smooth, it's kind of beautiful. I kind of want to take it to bed with me. And, it's just really, really, really just lovely. If except I don't want onion next to me. I just will say that. But no, it's very oniony.
Answer a couple of questions. Oh, sorry, Lori.
No, go ahead.
A couple of questions that I see on the chat that are kind of relevant here. What somebody asked about is there any way to tell on the label how old it is? And I know there's somebody from Roth on the call, so she can probably answer that, but I don't believe there's any kind of a date. I don't believe there are any date markings on the wheel. So, I mean, that we can see. There's probably a little sticker that comes in and on the package that's shipped to the retailer in, but I hope that our Roth rep can answer that question about the age.
She said, no, there is
any way for consumer to tell the age.
She said no,
Okay.
but I think, well, what I kind of answered that question earlier in the best way I could, because I think it might've been also in the context of your cheese, Alan. And I think that, cheeses have styles and so they're kind of within a framework of a certain age. And so it might, I said about yours, Alan, it might be 14 to 18 months tumbleweed. I don't really know. That was sort of a guess, but likewise with Ross, as you said, Janet, the minimum age is, what did you say, 7 months?
9 months, I believe it's released at 9.
Yeah, so no, you can't know, but that's why you have to buy these cheeses early and often.
Another question that came up that was interesting was, how do you know how to cut it? Should you shave it, slice it, cube it? To me, and Laura, I'm interested in your opinion, but the more intense it is, the more I want a small piece, even shaved. I actually might shave this Roth's cheese, or again, my Parm knife, just a little bit of a chunk. But if it's something moist and creamy, then you slather it on. But when it gets very intense and concentrated, I like these, especially these alpine, these kind of mountain type cheeses. I love a thin shaving.
I agree entirely, because these are, I mean, talk about a mouthful of flavor and texture. Thin, it kind of goes a long way, and it's really, really, really satisfying. And if it melts on your tongue, as opposed to just like chomping down, somebody asked about, well, I think the same question was asked about, when do you cut into cubes? My answer, never. Mm-hmm. But that's just me. Yeah. But really, you're not getting, because then you're getting a square of cheese, but you're not really getting the nuances in it. You're just kind of biting down on something. And really what you want, you can smell it when you cut it thinner, and it's just a much more overall well-rounded experience when it comes to that cheese, to a cheese. This cheese, Jana, you talked about the tumbleweed in the grilled cheese context. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of thinking this, I would not actually want to put this into a grilled cheese because I just like it as is, but I think it'd be good. But what about with wine?
Yeah, I mean, it's great. It's so interesting to me because it's, roughly the same age as the tumbleweed, and they are so completely different. And I just love that. I think it's so cool.
Yeah. Good point.
It's interesting. It's a little softer and creamier in some ways, which makes me think it could go with a Sauvignon Blanc, but there are those really intense umami flavors in there. So I still like this one with the cab personally. I think it makes me kind of want like a Granny Smith apple too, really thinly sliced to eat with it, like that sort of bright acid to offset the nutty onion creaminess of it.
It's very rich, to be sure. I'm sorry. I was just saying I liked it better with the Sauvignon Blanc myself.
Yeah, did you? Cool.
I did. Janet,
maybe it's doing the Granny Smith apple thing for you.
Exactly.
The other cheeses to look for from Roth that you might find more readily, very similar to this, it's called Grand Cru. And that's kind of their signature cheese. They make it in several ages. And it's same recipe as this Roth's Private Reserve. It's not raw milk, but it's a fabulous cheese. I think it won Best of Show at the American Cheese Society, the more mature, the Surchoix from Roth. So boy, they know their stuff. And they're doing some fun things. They're doing a new wash-drying cheese called Monroe, which I like quite a bit. That's just starting to get out into the marketplace. So thank you, Roth, for coming to Wisconsin. What is that, 30 years ago, and bringing this fabulous cheese.
They also have a cheese called Prairie Sunset, which is pretty readily available, and it's the most beautiful cheese. Whether or not you like it, I mean, there's nothing not to like in that cheese, but it's like this intense color. Actually, not unlike this. The next cheese, it's even darker though than this. It really is called Prairie Sunset for a reason, but this one is not. This is called Sankanter, and it is a very traditional Gouda made in the Netherlands, where Gouda is from. There is a town and a cheese of the same name. I guess, actually, Alan, I should have you talk all about this since you lived in Holland for a while. It was created by a company called Schipperkaas, or spelled Schipper, Chipper, a multi-generational family that actually really was what their claim to fame was making smoked cheeses, and it was smoked processed cheese. So they took essentially cheese rejects and melted them down and put them in bags over hickory and smoked them. And that became their sort of cash cow. But they also made so-called natural cheeses, which were Gouda or Gouda and Edam, two very well-known Dutch cheeses. And Sankanter, maybe some of you who are better with Google than I am, cannot find the origin of the name of this cheese. Some people there in Holland, I saw this blog, and they were arguing quite vociferously about it. But there is apparently a department store chain with that name in the Netherlands, and so I don't think that would have anything to do with it, but that's what they said. Anyway, it turns out that this is made in a very large factory, which still make processed cheese as well as the natural cheeses. The family sold it back just in 2014 after suffering very devastating fires, actually, at the plant. And it's in a place called Zaandam. So Gouda is it's what's called a washed curd cheese, which means that the curds, after they've kind of separated from the whey, they want to get the whey out of there. The whey is where the lactose resides, and whey, in the presence of bacteria, turns into lactic acid. So they want to keep the acid, or they want to get rid of it, really, to make it kind of a sweeter curd cheese. And this cheese, I'm sure they've added some annatto. Annatto is a natural dye. It comes from, it's sometimes known as achiote. And it's a seed, and it's the inside of that seed. And so that's what makes it this color. This is not the color of the cow's milk that they use to make this, I promise you. And I don't actually know how old this cheese is, but I am guessing several years. Janet, do you know? 3?
3 years, yeah. They claim, who knows?
They claim, right. Well, it probably is. And the wax is not edible, just in case anybody wants to know. That part is not. And I haven't tasted it, but go ahead, Janet, if you have, tell us what you're.
Well, for a 3-year-old cheese, don't you think, if you hear 3-year-old cheese, you think it's going to be hard? And it's so creamy. It just melts into this wave of cream on your tongue and leaves behind this, little impression of sweetness and salt. That's what I love about these Goudas, that they balance sweet and salt and acid in such a way that you just have to have another bite. Sometimes these really aged Goudas are like butterscotch candy, and like one bite is all you can do. It's just, they're so rich and sweet. This one I think is more, more balanced, and it's easy to eat a lot of it. Laura, I am curious about, and here I definitely would use my parm knife, something you can get, this is a nice one, but you can get a parm knife in a Parmigiano Reggiano knife in a houseware store for probably $15.
Yeah.
And it just enables you to make these chunks, which is what this cheese wants to be. It doesn't want to be sliced. It wants to be chunked. Laura, when you have, back from the old days when we had dinner parties and you had people over and you put this on your cheese tray, do you leave the wax on or do you take the wax off?
I leave it.
Cheese board.
I leave it on. Sometimes it's just because, well, in this case, that's not so much the case, but sometimes it's just something to set it on. But I think it gives reference for the cheese. So I do. Do you?
I kind of struggle with it because if people have a hard time cutting it because you can't get through the wax. So you have to tell people, peel off the wax.
Ellen, you lived in the Netherlands. What do they do there?
Well, it is available both ways. Not people cut away the wax, but
How about you?
yeah, people, Gouda is so prevalent. Yeah, they cut it away.
Okay.
By the way, folks, these are eyes like you would see in a Swiss cheese. A lot of cheeses just have kind of openings in them, random openings, because they're not pressed very much. But these are eyes, and you can tell they're eyes because they're round, and it's from gas production. They add sometimes it comes from the culture that produces carbon dioxide gas that makes these little bubbles, these little air holes, and sometimes they have little. Mine does. It's kind of moist inside. There's a little weeping going on in the eye, and that's a nice thing to see. It's considered a nice feature. So
yeah,
it's kind of a weepy Gouda.
It's kind of liquid gold, actually. It's interesting. I could chunk this, but I'm actually, because it's firm enough but creamy enough, I'm just slicing it super, super thin, just because I can, and it's not too much of a bite in one bite. It's not too much in one bite. A chunk to me is a little bit overwhelming, but I want to talk about wine. So, Jana.
Yeah.
So what
I actually really like this one with the Sauvignon Blanc.
Oh.
And yeah, I know, I'm surprised. I wasn't expecting that, but when I opened the package, it smelled exactly like salted caramel to me. And then the thing that was so cool about that is I feel like the texture is like caramely as well, because it's kind of rich and chewy. So I loved that. And I don't know, I can't really explain it, but for whatever reason, the cab was fine, but it just kind of like washed out. And with the Sauvignon Blanc, it brightened it. It was a little like refreshing.
I just want to say one thing about the cab. So you had instructed everybody to open it 45 minutes before we started this. Well, now we're another 45 minutes ahead of that, or behind it, whichever, I don't know. And so I would encourage people after we're done to go back and try these cheeses again with the cab, because I bet the experience will be different. And also your cheeses, like the Montenegro, which we decided with the rind we liked with the cab, might really be a different, and really, I mean, it was already a good experience, but I have a feeling it might even be more fun. I like this with the Sauvignon Blanc of the two. And if I didn't have either of these wines, I might be inclined to pair it with a sherry. That's what I would do. I don't know.
We are really, I don't know where this 60 minutes went. It has just flown by with great cheese and wine friends, and all of you on the chat. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all your questions, but you can always email Laura and me. We're happy to answer your questions directly anytime. And we certainly wanted to leave it just a minute to let you know that Cheese O'Clock will continue. We're taking a little April break, but we'll be back in May to celebrate American Cheese Month. And we are just getting our plan together, but we will, I think, within a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, be able to post our schedule with the cheeses and our wine accompaniments. So we hope you will mark your Thursday evenings in May to be with us for more Cheese O'Clock to celebrate American artisan cheese.
And I also wanted to say, if you are going through Cheese O'Clock withdrawals, you have another option, not with Janet or me, but the California Artisan Cheese Festival, which is in its 15th year, is going virtual this year, and not surprisingly. And you can still get tickets for it. It is a week from Friday, I think. It's the 26th, whenever that is. And maybe it's 2 weeks from Friday.
2 weeks.
I'm all right. And it's artisancheesefestival.com. you get 10 California cheeses, actually 9, and then the 10th one is from Utah. But these are all California Artisan Cheese Guild members. You get crackers, jam, and a bar of this amazing artisan chocolate from Sonoma County. The company is called Volo Chocolate. And then you get an hour-long presentation with cheesemakers and other guests that are pretty great. So I would highly recommend doing it. I'm going to do it. And anyway, and it all goes to support California cheesemakers who, like everybody, have had a really hard time. 2 members of the California Artisan Cheese Guild are no longer making cheese because of this pandemic. So you're doing good while eating well. So I would highly recommend it. Anyway,
I want to thank our guests, Jonna Kelly from Gallery Wines and Alan Glestoff from Five Spoke Creamery. Thank you for spending your Thursday evening with us. Thank you, everybody, for doing the same. And we will see you in May for more Cheese O'Clock.
And if you need to rewatch this, you can get the Zoom recordings probably tomorrow or the next day on Janet's and my sites. I saw there was a question about that. So yeah, thank you, Alan, so much. And thank you, Jana, so much. Both of what you make is so great. And we're so honored to have you both. So thank you.
Thank you. It was a ton of fun. Great to be with all of you.
I enjoyed it.
Thanks,
Good night, everybody.